Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and we are coming to you live on the West Coast. Thank you for those of you who staying up late. I know the show's starting a little bit later than we're accustomed to. Was putting some things together, making some edits, getting the sheet ready, getting all of our information together so that we can have ourselves a good little show. If this is your first time checking out the Super Show, I want to thank you and welcome you. Please help us out by hitting that like button. If you're new and you're wondering what you stumbled into, what we do here is cover college basketball from a DFS, prop betting, and overall betting perspective. If you're a returner and this is a spot in which you find yourself often, I do want to thank you. Pull up the chair that you're normally sitting in. Help us out. The likes that you guys have been dropping on the show lately have been tremendous. We have been doing some really good numbers, and I'm just really excited about the future of the show and the next month and a half of the college basketball season. Lots of fun stuff planned, from bracket reveal shows to our tournament leagues that we're going to do with drafts and all kinds of fun stuff, swag, money, everything that you can think of. Nice little slate we just had here today. It's nice when the posh play of the day and the legacy play, if you will, ends up having a nice one. Jordan Dingle, we're happy about that one. We can pat ourselves on the back a little bit there. Obviously, some mixed results in other spots there, but the posh play of the day, that's the one that has to hit. It did. Happy about that. We're gonna delve into this 12-game slate here and tried and true game by game breakdown. And I've moved over some of my projections. A lot of you guys have been asking me about that are not part of the Discord or are not subscribers. I do want to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to share my screen here in a little bit. I don't know how it's going to go. I don't usually do that. I'm not sure if it'll freeze or anything, but we're going to definitely try to share that information with you guys and show you what we're looking at. Still lots of editing to do there. A nice slate for sure. This is going to be focused on DraftKings. If you do have any FanDuel related questions, feel free to drop those either in the comments on demand if you're not watching live, or in the live chat there. I do circle back around in both the on demand and live chat and check out all the comments there before the show goes off the air. All right, we're going to jump right into it. By the way, the Mania queue, there's still a lot of opportunities to qualify. The $250 is going to be what is there today. I think it's already filled up, so if you didn't join, you're out of luck, but there may be a few spots there. As we get closer to the weekend, there will be that $1 mini max, which I have a new thing that I want to do, and tracking the 150 lineups that we put in there. There's been 2 mini maxes so far, pretty decent results, but I'm going to have a weekly piece where we break down our exposures and what was going through our minds in terms of strategy and everything else. So just kind of some additional pieces there for people who have been asking me about MME stuff. I'm habitually, or historically is a better word, a single entry player, but this is the time of the year where I do put on my MME hat and start making lots of lineups, trying to, survive some of this variance with fouls and fake starters, if you will, and all this other shenanigans that happen in the collegiate basketball universe. All right, without further ado, we're going to get right up into this slate. Alabama versus Auburn, total of 163. I think 170's got to be in consideration here with these two teams. Auburn, 4.5-point favorites at home. Let me get my Ken Palm page pulled up. I have way too many windows open right now. Now, these two teams just played each other not that long ago. We were very high on Janai Broome, but of course, the entire industry was as well. This was on Wednesday, January 24th. Auburn lost 79-75, but it wasn't because because of Janai Broom. In 25 minutes, he had 25 points, 14 rebounds, 5 blocks, did end up fouling out, but 33% usage rate. He was absolutely bonkers. Hit a 3 early on, and he just completely nuked this Alabama team. Now they're at home. I expect him to do more of the same. He's just a big-time matchup problem for this Bama squad. In the front court, Nick Pringle fouling all the time. Grant Nelson's not really the most physical guy. They just don't have the front court presence to contain a player like Janai Broom. And the fact that he can step out and hit threes, keep defenses on their toes in that regard. And he's added some assists lately. He had 11 assists in his past 2 games. The Ole Miss game, he just continued to pass out of the double team. He was so good in that game, and they ended up overcoming a halftime deficit to Ole Miss. The Ole Miss Twitter and what was it? Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss football coach, talking about we never lose at home and all this trash talk. And then suddenly Auburn beats them at Ole Miss, and the Auburn Twitter handle had a pretty funny retort there to Lane Kiffin and company with Auburn beating them. So Broom is fantastic. He's priced at 9.3. You're going to want to go ahead. As far as payups go, I'm usually trying to run more of a balanced lineup. We did that today. We had a pretty decent slate because of it, but this is certainly one where there are 2 or 3 payups that I absolutely have to have, and Janai Broom is number 1 on my list. I'm also going to be very high on Dalton Connect going up against LSU, and of course our guy Devin Carter, who let us down a little bit in the last game. He ended up aggravating something, missed a little bit of time, but got back on the game. But I am going to be heavy on Devin Carter as well. So 3 guys over 9K, which is pretty uncharacteristic for the way I like to build lineups. Obviously can't fit them all together, but I'm going to do my best to have pretty high exposure to all 3 of those guys. But it does start with Janai Broom. If I can play only one in a main lineup setting, it's going to be Broom, and I suspect he'll be pretty highly owned. Like I said, that game against Bama last time, he was only 8K, 1,300 cheaper, so a little easier to fit him, but he ended up being like 45, 50% owned in almost every single contest. Maybe not quite that highly owned at the 9.3 price, but I have no qualms about going back to him heavily in all formats. Auburn's done a little bit of finagling with their starting lineup. They play a lot of guys rotational wise. They have put, or I should say by Bruce Pearl has put Trey Donaldson in the starting lineup, and his minutes are starting to tick up. Donaldson's extremely talented, a lot of upside sophomore who is finally starting to get a up in the pecking order, higher role. They've moved the freshman Aiden Holloway to the bench. They like to bring Chad Baker off the bench, who's really, really dominant 6th man as well. And what they'd end up doing here is playing Jalen Williams, Janai Broom as their 2 kind of flagship pieces. Then they have Trey Donaldson playing about 22 to 25 minutes, Chad Baker playing 25 minutes off the bench, and then Chris Moore is kind of that. I call it the 5th Beatle. Some people call it the fake starters. They'll be the starter that plays 10 to 12 minutes. That's Chris Moore's role. And then Denver Jones, who did play 26 minutes as a starter, and he's kind of been in and out of the starting lineup there. He had a few games off the bench recently against Mississippi State, and then he comes back into the starting 5. But either way, he's typically playing that 19 to 23 minutes role, and that's a lot of guys. KD Johnson, Chaney Johnson, Aiden Holloway, Dylan Cardwell, all in that range. So we still have a pretty deep rotation, but it does seem like Trey Donaldson is starting to go up in the pecking order and be someone that we can start to rely on. But Janai Broom, very obvious play, one of my favorites on the slate, and we're going to be very, very heavily involved in figuring out a way to pay up for him. Jalen Williams is priced at just 6.6. I do like that. If you feel like you just can't get to Broom, you want exposure to this game, you do. Jalen Williams, very safe option. Now, don't get too wrapped up in quote-unquote safe. Talon Cooper of South Carolina had been really safe and only put up 20 today. You just never know sometimes. That South Carolina game was awesome, by the way. Colin Murray-Boyles, the man. But at 6'6", Jalen Williams playing a lot of minutes. Sometimes he sneaks up closer to 30, but he is a jack of all trades, contributes in all categories, and he is a relatively solid scorer. But I do want to be cautious, or at least caution you guys about playing guys just because they're safe. We need to still open ourselves up to upside there and be willing to take some level of risks here. Because as they say, you got to risk it for the biscuit, and sometimes going too safe can be more of a detriment to your overall lineup. I love Chad Baker at 6'2". I think nobody's going to play him. Guard forward eligibility. It's not just because he hammered Ole Miss before that game. You guys might recall talked about how key he is to this lineup and in this rotation. Bruce Pearl loves him. Coming off of the bench, he's kind of locked into that mid-20s role, taking plenty of shots. He does have a solid combined rebounding rate, has a pretty decent steals rate, and overall just going to be as the last month of the season, a key contributor for his team. I wouldn't be shocked to see him probably eke his way into the starting five as well, but I do like him in this role off the bench. He's a little bit spendy at 6'2", which will keep his rostership extremely low. But playing this, 26-minute type of role, there's no way I see him failing to reach value of 4x or higher. So Chad Baker's going to be somebody we are pretty high on as well, and he's going to be in a lot of my MME stuff. Trey Donaldson at 5'2", continuing to start, give him 25 minutes. Maybe that's a little bit high of a projection, but he's rock solid. I think Aiden Holloway, he's usurped him. If Holloway were to start, we can consider him at 4'8", but right now Donaldson as a starter at 5'2", a very good option as well. And I don't mind having a mini stack of this Auburn team or just this game in general. And Denver Jones 5'1", but I'm not going to be sucked into using him. He was really good scorer at FIU, a pretty solid overall contributor. But you see, he put up 19 real against Vanderbilt recently, and only 21 fantasy points. There's not really the best fit on this team. Better suited as a fifth or sixth option that takes shots and doesn't do a whole lot else. Not the best for DFS purposes. If he was like 3.5, I could be talked into him, but at 5'1", he's not cheap enough to really consider. Katie Johnson at 5K, also not cheap enough for me to consider. He only played 13 minutes against Ole Miss. He did have 20 fantasy points, but you're not going to be able to rely on that at 13 minutes very often. He only played 14 against Vanderbilt as well. All right. On the Alabama side, it's always Mark Sears that we want to consider when it comes to this team. He's just so cheap for what he actually does for this team, priced at only 8.3. Other guys putting up similar numbers, we're seeing them priced in the 9K range, and he's just not going up that way. Regardless of matchup, when he's priced this low, I kind of just tend to plug him in. Last time they played Auburn, 9 for 21, 44 fantasy points at 7.6. Very, very big play for me. Honestly, he was priced at 9K just a few weeks before that, and he really should be priced that high once again. Middling projection, I think, just being on the road here, but the 8.3 price will scare some folks off. We won't have the luxury maybe to use him if we're going Broom heavy lineups, or perhaps we're trying to get Broom with Carter, Broom with Connect. Sears is going to have to fall by the wayside, but I am certainly going to be looking for ways to get him in wherever I can. As far as the rest of Bama, Grant Nelson, I don't love him at 7K. The price is fine for him, I guess, but this is just one of those matchups where I don't feel that comfortable with him. Now, I know he put up 32 against them last time, had 11 rebounds. That, to me, was more of an anomaly. I don't foresee him going to Auburn and pulling down double-digit rebounds this time around. So you wipe that away. If he's not hitting his jump shot and scoring 14 to 15 real points, it's going to be a real problem here for him to make this value. And he does have some foul issues here that have been rearing their head a bit the last week or two of the season. So be advised about that the 7K price might look a little bit advantageous for Nelson, but I don't like this matchup or this spot for him one bit. You do have Latrell Wright-Sell priced appropriately at 5'7", worked his way in the starting lineup, really playing a solid role, has kind of usurped Rylan Griffin in some regards here, taking minutes away from him and usage, and also has taken usage away from Aaron Estrada, but Estrada is playing extremely well lately. His shot attempts have gone up heavily. His price has shot up to 7.1, and we're starting to see the Estrada that we expected to see earlier in the season and the dominant player that was at Hofstra for the last couple of seasons. So there are some nice run back options here for Alabama if you do run an Auburn mini stack. Also like Griffin at 5'4", even though he has been losing usage and minutes. And then when it comes to Alabama value plays, Nick Pringle, foul trouble, doesn't get enough minutes. You do have Diabate, who played 19 minutes. He had 34 against Mississippi State. I don't want to chase that necessarily. 4 or 5 might be a little bit too high, but I do look at the LSU game they played a few weeks back. 15 minutes, he had 8 points, 2 assists, a rebound, put up right around 15 fantasy points. I do think he has that ability in 15 minutes to probably pay off here in about we'll say 18, 15 to 16 minutes. Let's see. Yeah, he's not a bad look there at 4 or 5. So we'll see what that turns out to, especially if we think Pringle and Nelson and guys like that are going to get into foul trouble here. All right, moving on to the next game, we have LSU versus Tennessee. The Vols are 14-point favorites, total of 153. When it comes to Tennessee, Dalton Knecht just, totally solid. Took a little bit of a backseat in that game against Kentucky, in which they scored 103 points. He still put up 26, but at this 9-1 price point, we're going to need to see more. The problem is, and this is why he's not the top pay up for me, is there's just so many other options on the Vols, and he is a pretty unselfish player. Like when the Vols are operating as a unit and other guys are hitting shots and making things happen, Knecht doesn't feel like he needs to take all those shots. It's when the rest of the Vols offense is stagnant and they have to lean on Knecht to go into ISO and take every shot. Sakai Ziegler at 56 against Kentucky, 26 points, 13 assists. I love Sakai Ziegler. I'm so happy to see him healthy and playing this well. So that obviously takes off some of the upside from Knecht when Ziegler's playing like that. Jonas Aidu had 11 points, 11 rebounds. He had a big game, double-double there after a pretty lackluster performance against South Carolina. Shout out to South Carolina. If you don't have a future on them to win the SEC, go find a way to do it because that team is awesome. Josiah Jordan-James, a DFS favorite, has been for better part of a half decade now. 6'8", his price has come up. A little bit tougher to get there, but he did have 26 against Kentucky. I like him in this matchup against LSU, but it's pretty tough to get behind paying $7K. So I think we'll jump off of Triple J here, but if he's into a zone like that, that also takes offense away from Dalton Knecht. And then you have Santiago Vescovi. Pretty streaky, but at 5'5", he's at least viable. Somebody who's going to give you close to 4X there. The matchup against LSU is prime. And then you've got guys like Jemai Mashak, Jordan Gainey, some of these alt lineup type of plays. If you think that the Vols blow the doors off of LSU, there's a good chance that they do. And that's another knock on paying up for Dalton Knecht. And I usually don't try, or I don't worry about blowouts in college as much. Look what happened with the UConn game tonight, right? Like against Butler, they ended up winning by 9. Their starters played most of the minutes, and it was a big spread. A lot of worry that they're going to get pulled. Same kind of thing in what was it? There was the Houston game. They ended up winning by like 16, but Houston guys, starters wise, did play a fair amount of minutes. And if we would have worried about blowouts in either of those games, might have potentially missed out on some pretty heavy fantasy goodness. So I don't want to definitely exit off Dalton Knecht, Sakai Ziegler, some of these more expensive Vols players, but we do want to definitely, temper expectations to a degree as well. On the LSU side, it's a terrible, terrible spot, right? The Vols aren't a team. You heard me talk about this last night. There's certain teams that I just won't target against. Houston being one of them. Virginia at this stage with the way they're playing. Tennessee's not a team that I'll look to avoid by any means, but I don't make a habit to target against them heavily either. Now, I always love my guy, Jalen Cook, who's priced a bit high at 7-4. I was super annoyed with the way that the starting 5 came out against Arkansas there over the weekend because I was heavily invested in Jalen Cook there at 7-1 against that dumpster fire of a team, the Hogs. And LSU did end up blowing their doors off 95-74, but Jalen Cook didn't start. So I, of course, jump off Jalen Cook. He plays just 21 minutes. So theoretically, we can sit here and say that it was the right move to fade him, process-wise. But if we want to go results-wise, he put up 33. Like, that's pretty damn tilting. 20 points, hit 3 threes, got to the line 7 times, 2 steals, 3 assists, 3 rebounds. Just a really solid game. Like, the type of game I expected him to have and would have been happy with if he had started, and I would have kept him. We'll see if he gets back in the starting 5. There was murmurs about him, there was like team discipline thing there, and he did play less minutes, but we'll see if he ends up getting back in the starting 5 or not. Not really the most advantageous spot to use him against the Vols anyways. We did see Tennessee lose a game at home just recently, right? But that was more of an anomaly. I don't think they'll get caught with their pants down like they did against a very tough South Carolina team. They'll be ready for this LSU squad. And I do think Jalen Cook probably has a little bit of a more difficult time finding shots here against this Vols team. Same could be said for Jordan Wright. He's priced pretty high at 8.2. Now, he was priced at 9K just about a week and a half ago, but still the 8.2 price point is a little bit tough for me to get behind here against the Vols. I think they're both going to get stifled. As far as anyone else that we might be able to use, we do have some cheapies in guys like Tyrell Ward, who's priced down there at 4.6, Trey Hannibal at 5K. Now, over the weekend, nearly got a seat because of a swap to Trey Hannibal, who ended up being the starter over Jalen Cook. Played 29 minutes, had a solid 6 points, 6 rebound, 4 assist game, which equated to 24 fantasy points. Those peripherals add up. I like him if he starts again, even at the 5K price point, not going out of my way to roster him. He's still cheap enough to be a value. Roughly 30 minutes. He can do enough in those other categories. And since he's not reliant upon scoring, that won't affect him as much. He'll still be able to do some other things, such as grabbing rebounds, getting steals, things of that nature. So I do look at Trey Hannibal as the most viable LSU play if he starts. If he goes back to the bench and Jalen Cook starts, then I would be probably zero exposure to all LSU guys. All right, moving on to the next one here. We have Wisconsin and Michigan. By the way, felt like just absolute garbage all day today. Let me tell you, man, having kids sometimes is just the gift that keeps on giving. And I wasn't even going to go to work today, but then the boss called and I had to go in for a walkthrough and all this other stuff. So in case that happens tomorrow, I'm going to be working all night tonight on the sheet and articles. So everything will be out bright and early in the morning. I wanted to say that out loud, so I forced myself to do it because oftentimes I say it and then I get off the air and go to bed, but I will not be doing that. So anyways, Wisconsin versus Michigan. That's more for me than you guys. It's just my positive affirmation of the night there. Wisconsin 5.5 point favorites, total of 143.5. We are at home here for Michigan, so that means Doug McDaniel, the weird off and on and off and on. So he'll be playing here. Expect him to play 36 minutes. He's only 6'1". It's a pretty good price for Doug McDaniel, honestly. I think that he's probably got to be heavily considered. I don't like the matchup for him against Wisconsin. This Badgers team is nasty. They look really good right now, playing some excellent overall basketball. But 6'1" for a guy playing majority of the game at home, have to imagine he can put up 25, 26 here. Does put him in at value. You have his teammates like Oliver Amquat, 7'4". I'm probably never paying that against Wisconsin. Terrace Reed, who has been good, but 6'1" for him, that's a little spendy. Amari Burnett, who's not been consistent. Terrence Williams, also not been consistent in the mid 5K range. It's only 400 or 500 more for Doug McDaniel. So it just doesn't really make any sense to use anybody on Michigan at all most of the time right now. But if you are, Doug McDaniel has to be that guy. And I'm really kind of wondering how I can get away from him. It doesn't mean he's going to pan out. We saw him struggle against Rutgers recently in 34 minutes, only 16. The problem with that game, if you watched it, was Doug was totally uninterested for most of that game. I like to watch, obviously watch games to see what they're doing on offense in certain situations, but we're dealing with kids here who have real emotions, real humans. I tweeted this last night when Kevin McCullough, friend of the show, Rob, of course, thinks everything's fixed, and McCullough lost the game on purpose, whatever. Maybe he did. But McCullough missing free throws when he's a damn near 90% shooter reminds us that there's a human element to this game. These aren't robots. And then you can watch these kids and kind of pick up on things and guys hanging their heads after missed shots or, not listening to the coach. What was that? The Georgetown huddle that was going around just the other day, Ed Cooley, calling Jay Heath by name. Jay Heath, pay attention to the huddle. Like, okay, so we know going forward, Jay Heath gives no F's at all about what Ed Cooley is saying or what Georgetown is running. Good information, picking up that information. Doug McDaniel cared very little about that game against Rutgers, and when they went down early, it was really, really evident. With that being said, his price is good, but I'm not doing somersaults about rostering him or anyone on this Michigan team for that matter. When it comes to Wisconsin, we've had some pretty tasty prices for these guys, but because they've played so well, especially Tyler Wall, his price has jammed up to nearly 8K, which was a price we saw a bunch last year. Wisconsin going through some changes. Wall was without Johnny Davis, Wall was supposed to be the guy. Comes into the season priced at like 8K and nearly 9K. It's like, whoa, that's too high for Tyler Wall. But he had a hell of a game last time out, nearly putting up 50 fantasy points against Purdue in a close loss, 10 of 16. I like using Tyler Wall when he's in that mid 6K range because he contributes in all categories. He's not the most reliable scorer, although he was getting to the rack with consistency there against Purdue. But I don't know that we can pay the 8K price for him. So I'm not going to chase that, even though the matchup against Michigan is good for him. That's just a little bit of the opportunity cost there that I'm not feeling too excited about. With that being said, he still very well could put up a 30-plus game. I'm going to look instead towards the 6'3 priced AJ Storr, who is very reliant on his scoring. We know that. Or even the 5'9 price Chucky Hepburn, who I try not to roster ever if I can help it. Hepburn is one of those guys that just drives me nuts. He plays every single minute of the game and somehow can end up putting up under 20 fantasy points. He does it all the time. He did eclipse 24 in back-to-back games, so perhaps we can bite here and take a little bit of Chucky Hepburn in a favorable matchup against a very lowly Michigan team. But with that being said, I'm also not trying to roster him across the board or have 75% ownership by any means. AJ Storr is the guy that I do want. Taking a ton of shots, didn't particularly perform all that well against Purdue because he didn't have any peripherals, and that's something that he normally won't have. He did score 14 real points, and Storr props is usually what we want to target, but the 6'3 price for him is viable. The game against Minnesota, in which he had 12 rebounds, don't even consider that. That's such a big anomaly. That won't happen probably ever again in the season. But he can do enough in the rebounding categories 2, 3, 4 to supplement some of his other inefficiencies, and then score 20 real points and pay off this price. So if we get him for 33 minutes out there in a close game on the road, definitely have to like AJ Storr. Certainly one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Wisconsin play of the day. But again, not looking to roster these guys in a high amount. Steven Crowell at 7'3", kind of just a take it or leave it price, maybe a last guy in type, but not somebody that I'm going to be using as a building block by any means. All right, on to the next one here. We have Villanova versus Xavier. 3-point favorite are the Musketeers. Total of 146. Xavier, they are just a three-man show at this stage, right? Quincy Olivari, who's priced extremely high, Davion McKnight, and Des Claude. Those three are really the only options on Xavier that you can really count on to at least, get close to value. Usman, who was priced at 6K against DePaul in a great matchup. I felt like he was pretty sneaky. He's just got such foul issues right now. He fouled out in 20 minutes, did not pan out. Now he's priced at 5'8". The matchup against Villanova is good technically because front court wise, they're pretty mediocre there. He did have 11 and 6 against them last time they played. And, oh, by the way, he fouled out. So that's just hard to use him. The price is right at 5'8", but I don't know how many more minutes over 20 we're actually going to get from Abu there. And that is the real problem there. And that means we just can't use him in our main lineups, even though that price is super appealing. GBP shares, absolutely. Olivari, when they made this move in the portal, I've got a real good friend that's, lives and breathes and eats and sleeps Xavier basketball. And, he was really excited about this. I myself felt like, okay, Olivari's a very good volume scorer. Yes. But if they're bringing him in to be like, a facilitator or to replace Soli Boom, for example, or maybe like a little bit of Paul Scruggs mixed with Soli Boom, which has been so successful for this X team, he's really not that guy. And got into a little bit of argument with him and some other Xavier fans. And of course, every time Olivari does something like he just did against DePaul, puts up 43 real points and 71 fantasy, they come back around and remind me that, hey, you're not that high on Olivari still. I mean, as a volume scorer, he took 20 shots. Still impressive. I mean, 60% to take 20 shots and hit 7 threes. Like, I'm not going to take anything away from him. But at the end of the day, he is a volume scorer. Paying 9-4 is a lot different than paying 7-3 or even the 8-1 he was last time. The matchup against Villanova is fantasy friendly to a degree, but it's obviously not DePaul fantasy friendly. Last time out against Villanova, he put up 14 and 8. I think, we're probably talking about a guy putting up 18 to 20 real, maybe 5-6 rebounds, solid numbers, but are we really going to be paying 9-4 for him over Janai Broome? I'm not. Maybe some people are, even Dalton Connect in a blowout. I'm just not paying for Quincy Olivari. So if he's chalk and I lose to him and he puts up 70 again, then I guess that's just what I'll have to live with. But I just can't imagine paying that 9-4 for him on this particular slate with so many other options on there. And, Des Cloud, he put up only 15 real points, 25 fantasy. He doesn't need to score to put up those big numbers. He's just as capable of putting up a big scoring game. So if I have to use a Xavier guy, I prefer Dez. He's just been so good the way he is, ascended up the pecking order and into a bona fide alpha on this team. He had a pretty lackluster game against Villanova last time, shot 5 of 17. Nova on the road a little bit weaker than they are at home, so I'm not as worried. You have David McKnight there at 7.5. He's been uber consistent. While, Dez and Olivari have those highs and lows, he doesn't. He's just been extremely steady. His game against Villanova was very similar to Dez. He put up about 24, 25 fantasy points. So none of them are going to be sticking out in terms of projections by any means, but they're okay plays if you want to use them. I think McKnight at 7.5, probably the most realistic option you can get to, but Dez is still my favorite play from Xavier overall. On the Villanova side, we certainly have to consider, because Xavier's just giving up a ton of everything. The fantasy points that they're bleeding to multiple positions is very noticeable, especially in the, this latter half of the Big East conference play that they've been in. Eric Dixon is the most obvious play there, sitting at 7.6. The alpha on the team, great rates. Not the best game against Villanova, which was a hard-fought win. They ended up winning by 18 because Providence was totally outmatched and outplayed there. But usually you're going to see Villanova involved in these 80 to 85 type games, maybe 90, 80 games. Like, there's going to be a lot of points here, and that's going to be Dixon putting up a lot of those. He had 13 and 9 against Xavier last time in 31 minutes, but I'm very, very high on him for this slate, and I'm expecting him to put up more like the numbers he did against Butler or even Marquette, where he scored 36 plus fantasy points. So Dixon is where it starts for us. The rest of Villanova can be troublesome because they do rotate production at the guard spots. TJ Bomba's there at 6K, a little high for me. Mark Armstrong has finally started to become a little more reliable than he was all of last year and most of this year to this point. Paying 5.5 for him, I'm a little uncomfortable with it, but I recognize he's at least playing well. Justin Moore appears to be broken. You don't take the injuries that he has and dealing with the knee issue that keeps flaring up. The price is right on him at 5.3. It's hard to get away from. He does continue to be chalky. I think people will stubbornly play him in this matchup, and it's certainly a right matchup for him. I just don't know that Justin Moore has the right stuff in post-injury wise to ever really put up those big numbers that we're used to before. In last year and the year before, he seems to be lacking that explosiveness, and he's not doing enough on the scoring side. He's not aggressive at all, and it's not a shoe-in or lock that he pays off this 5.3 price point. But it will feel pretty bad the second you jump off of Justin Moore and he does get hot, because there will be games where he hits threes. But as far as taking it to the rack, I think those days might be over, at least for right now. Then you have Hakeem Hart at 4.7. He's starting to dwindle in the minutes department, but he did have 25 against Providence, 2 steals, 5 assists, 4 rebounds, 9 points. That's why I always like Hakeem Hart as a value piece, because he does do a little bit of everything for this team. It's just the minutes that have been falling because of Mark Armstrong and the health of Justin Moore makes it a little bit harder to use him, but the price of 4.7 is at least reasonable enough to take some shots. Now, Brennan Hausen played 23 minutes against Providence, and I do like him as a future piece. I think next year we're going to be talking about him a lot more. If he's higher in the rotation / pecking order now and he's playing these 20-plus minutes, I'm at least interested at the 3.6 price point, but we have no way to guarantee those minutes will actually be there for him. So that is something to be aware of. He did hit 4 threes against Xavier last time. Those were all in the first half. He got super hot against them, ended up with 20 fantasy points, did absolutely nothing in the second half, but he does have that capability and is a very streaky shooter if they ride him early on. So we'll see what happens there with his actual minutes. It does help that Jordan Longino has been playing sporadically lately. He's also dealing with a ankle issue, which has kept him out of, the 25, 30-minute games that he had been having earlier in the year. So a lot of just, lingering injury issues for this Villanova team that makes it so hard to play anyone not named Eric Dixon. But I tend to look at GPP shares of guys like Hausen or Hart, and then looking at the starting lineup there. If I'm not using Dixon, it's a tough decision, but I typically am looking at more just because it's hard to quit him just yet. And then you have Tyler Burton there at 5.7. Not the alpha that he was at Richmond here at Villanova. I think the system here that Kyle Neptune runs doesn't fit Burton's style very well. And he just really hasn't been able to get the shots that he was accustomed to. He was exposed as a little bit of a volume scorer there at Richmond, not as efficient. And you're seeing he's taking, 5-6 shots per game here when he was taking 12 to 15 with consistency at Richmond, not putting up those big numbers, doesn't have the peripherals to support a 5-shot game. But the 5.7 price point is definitely appealing for Tyler Burton. But we have to decide it's good because of name value there, or is he actually a good value piece that we can utilize? Tyler Burton of Richmond, probably not walking through that door, but I will say if he gets like 30, 32 minutes, it would seem pretty unlikely he didn't make value at a sub 6K price. All right, next game on the slate here, Pittsburgh versus NC State, total of 142.5. The Wolfpack are 3.5-point favorites. Man, this Pittsburgh team is frustrating as hell. Blake Hinson, you never know what you're going to get with him. Forrest Gump would say that, Blake Hinson is accustomed to or likened to a box of chocolates because he's playing every minute. He's out there on the floor. He's getting volume, but just some games he's breaking so hard. He's putting up 19 to 20, and then some games he's putting up 38 to 40. A clear tournament-only option at this point. I don't know how you could justify using him, especially in a tough environment, a tough matchup against NC State at almost 8K. 7.5, that's a GBP price all the way. And I'm a big Blake Hinson proponent. I use him all the time, but I'm just not using him in my main build right now. I would prefer to stay on the Carlton Carrington train, whose price has dropped below 7K again. Had that big game for us against Wake Forest. Didn't do all that well against Notre Dame. Fouled out in 20 minutes. I'm going to wipe that foul game away, which he did foul out a week before that against Duke. Does happen occasionally, but 6.7 going up against NC State. I think we see him get back up to that 35, 36-minute mark. Overall, his rates are fantastic. There is chatter about him being a one and done here. I would love to see him come back, but a lot's going to depend on if Pittsburgh can make a late run here. Probably not going to be tournament bound. NIT at best, but we'll see how he finishes. 24% shot rate, 23% usage rate, only shooting 30% from long range. So it'd be nice for him to come back, work on his three-point shooting over the summer, and be just, the best player in the ACC next year. 25.3% assist rate, playing 82% of the available minutes. So I still like Carrington at 6.7. I think that price is advantageous. I don't think people will be using him. He was cheaper last week and nobody used him. So that's one of those plays that I'll probably be way higher on than the rest of the field. And we'll have likely 35, 40% ownership there in 20 plus lineups. While on Blake Hinson, I'm going to be below 20%. As far as the rest of the Pittsburgh rotation, it's really just 6 guys that we want to look at because our boy Guillermo Diaz-Graham has seemingly just played his way out of the rotation and into the doghouse. And it's a shame because he really is quite good. I don't think he's going to stick around here. If Capel does, we'll probably see him at the portal. I'd love to see him go to like the MAC or something like that. Ball State, it's Eastern Michigan, something. We'll see what happens. But we're talking about obviously Carrington and Hinson, and then the rest of the rotation, because really they're just running 8 guys, 10 plus minutes, but there's only 6 of them that are fantasy relevant. So we talked about Hinton and Carrington. Jalan Lowe, who's remained in the starting lineup despite Ish Leggett being healthy. Lowe playing 35 plus minutes. He's out there. He's contributing. His price has gone up a little bit to where it's harder to justify using him, but he is only 6'1" compared to Leggett 6'7". Those prices flopped after Lowe was higher than Leggett. So now we can start to consider using Lowe here once again, especially as a starter. Leggett coming off the bench, he played 32 minutes in their last game, and then you have Federico. Federico is playing about 19 to 22 at the 5, and then you have Zach Austin, who is a starter in name, plays enough minutes, but is very low on the overall pecking order. He's only priced at 5.5, so there is a little bit of upside there, not much. I'd still rather play instead a guy like Federico, who does have foul risk. We know that. But does have a solid overall fantasy point per minute number, or Jalan Lowe at 6'1", or Ish Leggett at 6'7". So there's a lot to like on this Pittsburgh team overall, but when you start getting into the nuts and bolts, meat and potatoes of the actual matchup against NC State, it's not quite as appetizing as it may seem. So if we're ignoring matchups, yes, a Pittsburgh mini stack seems pretty advantageous. Their prices are low. But when you start to add that element to it and effect of how NC State plays defensively against these perimeter positions that Pittsburgh's strong at, it does make me a little bit worried there about being too heavily invested in Pittsburgh, and especially because this is the year of Capel that I expected them to have last year. I think they played well above their expectations and above their head. This year, they're playing to last year's expectations, and I just don't feel good about them. I feel like they're going to go in here and lay an egg. So I'm really nervous about paying too many of the Pittsburgh guys. Carrington is the guy that I would be okay with. Leggett, we've been riding, just every slate, but he's now at a price here at nearly 7K that we can start to temper expectations or lower that exposure to a degree. On the NC State side, it's been kind of a tough year in terms of consistently predicting which NC State player we want to use on a slate-to-slate basis. We had some really good efforts from Mo Diarra. When nobody else was using him, he was paying off a lot. Now his minutes have fallen back below 18, 20. He's priced up over 5K. Really difficult to use him. You've got Michael O'Connell in there playing a bunch of minutes now. It's kind of pushed our dude Dennis Parker down. MJ Rice, done for the year, packing it up. Casey Morcell's out there yucking it up, playing a bunch of minutes, which is just awful for me and DFS players. Jaden Taylor's played pretty well, so his price has gone up to 6.5. And then you have DJ Horn, who's been the dude, but an almost 8K price point. I'm not that excited about using him, although I do admit with his peripherals upside and his ability to score in bunches, he's clearly the best overall option and most appealing. But I just don't have a lot of love for anyone on this NC State team in this game, even though the matchup against Pittsburgh does have sneaky upside. It's a shame Dennis Parker's barely playing, but he's a youngster going through a tough time, hitting a wall, and right now he's just not earning minutes. So he's only 4-1, but I'll be keeping an eye on Dennis Parker because that is my guy. You have DJ Burns there at 5.8, which is a cheap price for him technically. He only plays about 18 to 20 minutes usually, but this 5.8 price point, if he can get Federico into some foul trouble early and kind of bully the paint a little bit, I think we could see him have a really nice rebounding game, which will in turn lead to him scoring 8 to 9 real points due to putbacks. He has a mid-range game that he can utilize, and he does get to the foul line. So there is some interest there for me on DJ Burns at 5.8, but overall it's a game that I am not that high on overall. All right, next game on the slate, Louisville versus Syracuse. Syracuse 8.5-point favorites, total of 153.5. Benny Williams has been dismissed from the program. And I think most of us saw this coming. Benny Williams coming out of high school, all the upside in the world. I thought, man, this kid is going to be just ridiculous because this before Boeheim retired, like they're going to play him 38 minutes. He's going to put up ridiculous numbers. He has a lot of upside. The talent is clear. The athleticism is clear. Like I thought there was going to be a second coming of Gabinajay from a few years back. Remember how great he was, the Duke transfer into Syracuse, and Gabinajay putting up those just massive numbers for us with consistency when we played on FanDuel more than DraftKings. And he was just, playing every single minute and putting up these 40s. I thought that was going to be him, Michael Gabinajay. I thought that was him. It wasn't, unfortunately. A lot of undisciplined actions from Benny Williams. Didn't get the nurturing he probably needed. And I don't think you go to Syracuse if you're a prospect that needs nurturing. I don't think you go to Michigan State if you're a prospect that needs nurturing. There's a lot less of that tough love type of coaching out there these days. I don't mind it personally. I was also from an era where that was like prevalent, right? No participation trophies. But I think Benny probably needed to go to like somebody that would nurture him, like a Baylor. Coach Drew's really good at that. Coach Tang in Kansas State, really good at getting the most out of his guys. So we'll see what happens. Might not be a bad idea for him to just bite the bullet and go to the mid-range or a mid-major level and ball out there like again at a MAC school or maybe A-10, something like that. But the rotation of Syracuse, historically pretty short, pretty shallow. Now you're taking Benny Williams out, who was playing over 20 minutes, so he was starting to play more. We're talking about Justin Taylor, Chris Bell, Malik Brown, Judah Mintz, J.J. Starling as a starting five, and now you've got Quadir Copeland probably absorbing a lot of those minutes, playing 25 plus, maybe a little more Kyle Cuffey, and then Peter Carey, who played 10 minutes last game, backing up Chris Bell or Malik Brown. They don't have a lot of size in the current starting five that they run. Peter Carey is almost 7 foot, but he's not a very coordinated 7 foot, so they don't play him a ton of minutes just yet. Malik Brown is very physical, even though he's only 6'9". He plays a lot bigger than he is. But the Syracuse rotation being short means we got to consider some of these guys because they're going to be playing a ton of minutes. Looking at it, obvious, Judah Mintz going to play just about every single minute. 8.4 is a pretty fair price for him. I think he's a guy that we want to have heavy exposure to. Malik Brown's going to play 32, 33, 34 minutes. He's a pretty decent look at 7-1. It's high enough to scare people off, but it still projects quite well with those minutes. Taking the 24-ish minutes away from Benny Williams and just kind of putting them into Quadir Copeland, like I said, maybe a little Kyle Cuffey. Copeland's 5'7" coming off the bench. He projects super well if you're thinking he's going to play 25-plus minutes. J.J. Starling's going to play every single minute. Not quite the best price anymore at 6'2", but that backcourt is starting to develop and play as well as we expected it to. And then we will probably see more minutes come back to Justin Taylor, who was pretty solid in the non-con, but has been a non-factor in ACC play. He's there at 4K, is still technically starting. Perhaps we see him get back into that 25, 26-minute range and become fantasy relevant once again. This is a very good matchup, obviously, against Louisville. Now, Louisville just won a game against FSU, which nobody saw coming. Nobody will expect them to beat Syracuse, but if they're going to play the lineup they played last game and ride it as hard as they did, they could beat the Syracuse team. I truly believe that. And there's a betting opportunity here for you or Louisville at plus 8.5 and maybe a little sprinkle on the money line even. On the Louisville side, so pulling up that starting five that won this game against FSU and really just a masterful performance. I mean, they scored 101 points, which in the olden days of like Trent Forrest and just a couple of years ago, FSU, they would never have given up 101 points to Louisville. But we saw Brandon Huntley Hatfield was just completely dominant in the low post, 29.7 rebounds. But the starting five that they rolled with, Caleb Glenn, who fouled out in 12 minutes, he just can't stop fouling. Trey White, Curtis Williams, BHH, and Mike James, and they all played 30-plus minutes. If Caleb Glenn hadn't fouled out, I think he would have played a lot of minutes there too. And they ran Tyler Johnson off the bench for 38 minutes. He scored 27, 6 rebounds, 11 assists, just a total slate-breaking performance. Emmanuel Okafor, who a lot of fans of Louisville are calling to play over Caleb Glenn, just played 10 minutes off the bench, and then Zan Payne, coach's son, played 7. So now we're talking about a really short rotation for Louisville as well, and suddenly this Louisville-Syracuse game becomes a prime stack. Ugly game, 2 opponents that maybe we're not that keen on, but they're going to be playing a lot of minutes, and they're not going to have the subs available like some of these other teams do. Looking at Louisville, it's easy to say, oh, well, BHH against this Syracuse front court that doesn't have size, he makes the most sense. He's a little bit spendy at 7-7, but yes, coming off the big game, he does make the sense in that regard. I really like Mike James, who is priced down to 6'3" now. He had those just, bonkers games there in early January when Louisville had like 1 sub to use. He's kind of fallen back in the pecking order there, shot 1 of 8 against Virginia, 1 of 12 against Clemson, 2 of 6 against FSU. But because of those performances, his price is only 6'3", and we're talking about a situation where Trey White's 6'9", Tyler's 6'6". James now looks pretty good. We will have to see the status on Sky Clark, who is dealing with a head injury, as they're calling it. So if he returns at only 5'6", he's at least interesting, but mainly that ends up taking minutes away from what will be Tyler Johnson. So Tyler's playability, viability will be based off of the status there of Sky Clark. But either way, I think Mike James is borderline main team playable at 6'3". I do like Trey White regardless as well. I know he had an awful game against FSU, but he had that monster 54 against Clemson, 29-14. Trey White, to me, is one of the better players on this team, so I am looking at him as well, especially in this matchup. And then Curtis Williams, who's priced at 4'9", guard forward eligibility. No Sky Clark means perhaps we're going to get 30-plus minutes out of him again. He's played 20-plus minutes in each of the last 5. He's been in and out of the starting 5. The last game was his first hitting over 20 in like 6 last games. I definitely like him long-term as well. He's going to be somebody that I'm looking at. As long as he starts, I'm going to be using him in my main lineup as a value piece. And Caleb Glenn's only 3'6". Obviously he doesn't have the game logs that are going to want to, make you want to roster him at all. But as a starter, he's going to have that opportunity. I don't think he gets yanked out of the starting lineup anytime soon. Just has to get that foul rate in check. If we can get him up to 20 minutes here against Syracuse, I think he has a big rebounding game and he should be able to pay off 3-6. So I'm on board with still continuing to use Caleb Glenn, especially if you're an MME player. You don't want to full fade him. I think that's a mistake. All right, first half of the slate in the books. Moving on to the next one here, we have Creighton versus Providence. The Jays are 2-point favorites, total of 142. Now, Providence, what a letdown game they just had. Devin Carter there at 9K. And, a letdown game for him was 31 fantasy points. So Carter's still just a absolute monster of a player. And that's why I'm still putting him pretty high on my priority list, even at this 9K price at a matchup against Creighton that maybe on paper isn't the best. 35 minutes, even though he ended up with a minor injury there, it seemed. 17 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, only 9 shots there. Expect that number to go way higher here against Creighton. The fact that he put up 30 and had only 9 shot attempts and, like I said, a down game by his standards really tells you all you need to know about Devin Carter's viability here, and it's just matchup proof for this Friars team, which still has tournament aspirations. Josh Odoro played 35 minutes against Villanova. If he's getting that kind of playing time, I certainly want to have Odoro shares. He's not cheap anymore at 8.2, but you look through and what he's been doing, 30-plus fantasy points in each of the last 6. There is some foul risk here against this Creighton team. The good news is they're at home. However, I do worry because the Big East games tend to have the worst officiating, and there's a few that are foul whistle heavy. So Kalkbrenner tends to get, this is what everybody in the Big East says, And if you watch games, Kalkbrenner tends to get a favorable whistle. It's not Zach Edey, but he gets a Zach Edey whistle against his opponents, even on the road, especially at home. So be careful there with Oduro. I think there's a little bit of risk there for fouls, especially. And same conundrum here with the rest. If you're not using Oduro or Carter, it's really kind of just a stay away spot. Ticket gains is priced fairly. And he'll have these blow up games, but most of the time he's under 20. You have Corey Floyd, who starts, plays 20 minutes, no upside. Garwi Duell starts occasionally, plays 14 to 20 minutes, no upside. Jaden Pierre's price has dropped way down after being, almost 7K, which was unplayable. He's had some pretty rough outings. His 3-point shooting has been an abomination. He's made just one in his last 4 games. That's where he gets majority of his fantasy points. So now he's back to a level at 5.2 where he's playable again, playing 30 plus minutes. You can absolutely consider him. On the Creighton side, it's pretty similar to the Xavier side, where there's 3 guys in particular that are going to be on the floor for most of the game and are going to contribute on a consistent level. And that's Baylor Shireman, who's priced accordingly at 9.2, Ryan Kalkbrenner, who's 8.6, and Trey Alexander, who's 8.5. All 3 of those guys are viable options, even in what is a on-paper tough matchup against Providence. The first time against Providence, they won 69-60. Trey Alexander had an extremely huge game against them, put up nearly 40 fantasy points. Ryan Kalkbrenner had 22 and 12. Baylor Shireman had 9 and 11, 3 steals. Alexander, 21 real, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and a block. Ashworth hit a bunch of threes, had 12 points. Mason Miller had 5 and 3. And then that was about it. Creighton's bench is still horrendous. Creighton's bench makes Kansas bench look deep. So it's the starters you want to look at here. Ashworth at 6.5. His price is just ballooned up. Honestly, for me, I couldn't even use him at 5.6, let alone 6.5. So I know because of the lack of a bench, he's ending up playing basically every minute. He has looked like the Utah State version of himself lately, but I am not paying that price for him at 6.5. And I know he's coming off a monster 37-point performance against Butler, but that's not going to be one that I chase. I will still be involved in Trey Alexander, Ryan Kalkbrenner, and Baylor Shireman. There has been a need to play Mason Miller because there's just, on the slates Creighton's been on, there's been a lack of value. You see his minutes and his ineffectiveness have made him a very hard play, even at 4.7. I have almost no interest in him. Francisco Farabello played 28 minutes there against Butler. His minutes have been trending in the right direction, but there's another cheapie with almost no upside. So you got to be a little bit aware of what you're doing there when you're plugging in some of these cheap guys. All right, next game, Georgia versus Mississippi State. Mississippi State 8-point favorites, total of 145. Now, Mississippi State last time out, and they project well for me usually because they've been putting up some nice games, but that Alabama game was an absolute abomination. Tolu Smith had 23 and 5. He actually played pretty well, but Cameron Matthews in foul trouble the whole way. Josh Hubbard started hot and then completely disappeared. DJ Jeffries was completely locked down, only played 11 minutes. Deshaun Davis was just about worthless. I don't like talking bad about these kids, but Deshaun Davis was not good. And then we saw a Shaquille Moore game where he hit a couple of shots and then disappeared for large stretches of the game. So they just got their doors completely blown off. This is a good bounce back opportunity in a fairly strong matchup against Georgia. Looking at Tolu Smith for sure, this is a really strong play at 8-1. I would have expected him to be even higher, but if you look back, I guess the algo wouldn't price him to like 9K because he hasn't been putting up necessarily the biggest numbers here since returning. He's had a couple of 40s against Vanderbilt and Kentucky, but for the most part, you're seeing him put up 28, 30, 32, 31. So he's right at that 4X mark, making value. That may scare some people off, but at home against Georgia, there aren't many better opportunities for him to detonate than against Georgia here. That front court of the Bulldogs is pretty susceptible. This is a great DVP spot. Tolu Smith has phenomenal rates across the board. He should not fail us. 31% usage rate, 26% shot rate, combined rebounding rate of 31%, and he has a block and steal rates just under 2% each. The real reason Tolu Smith will fail, if he does fail, is if he becomes mega chalk. But if our editor, one of our editors, Adam Young, who is in the Discord all the time, shout out to him, rosters Tolu Smith. He is the absolute jinx when it comes to rostering Tolu. So if you know Adam Young, reach out to him tomorrow. Let him figure out, like, if he's not using Tolu, we'll go all in. If he is using Tolu, then we're going to have to fade him because he is just a jinx. We all got those players that don't do well for us, but that dude is a Tolu Smith jinx. I got to get him a shirt that says that or something because damn. Josh Hubbard, still love him. 33.5% shot rate, man. He was on his way early in that game against Bama. It looked like he was going to go completely nuts. They adjusted after he hit his first shot, got to the foul line, instant 7 points, and then all of a sudden Bama just contained. One of the worst games of his young career. Priced at $7K, which is a little bit tougher to get to. I think that's one that I'm probably going to be way under on, even though I do really like him in this spot. I'm more so going to be going to Tolu Smith. I do want to also go back to Cameron Matthews, who's priced at 6'9". It's not the most affordable price for a third or sometimes fourth option on a team, but he has major upside. You throw out the foul game that he just had, like against Ole Miss, 16-12, playing next to Tolu. Against Auburn, 14-11, playing next to Tolu. Going up against Broome. Against Florida, he had 9-11. He's just had some really big numbers since Tolu Smith has been back. And in fact, he's been even better with Tolu. Now, back in early December, he had a 50 against North Texas, which really showed his upside. He only scored 9 real during that. That's why I still want to be invested and involved in Cam Matthews, because he doesn't really need to score in order to put up these huge numbers. Had he not been in just terrible early foul trouble and just couldn't get into a rhythm at all against Bama, I think we would have seen him play extremely well. He had a pretty rough outing against Bama the first time in early January as well, which he was also in major foul trouble. So a lot of that has to do with the foul issues that he had against Bama, their play style, whatever it might have been. I don't worry about him here against Georgia. I think he'll be very low owned, and I'm definitely going to be overweight on him compared to the rest of the field. On the Georgia side, it's kind of tough for me to get excited too much about them right now. They've played a lot better than I expected. This matchup is pretty middling on paper. It's neither, it's not to be scared of, but it's also not advantageous. We do have a really nice price on Noah Thomason at 5'7". He continues to project well, but he's just so lackluster. He was a really divine scorer at Niagara, but he's getting the volume here at Georgia, but he's learned, very quickly. There's a difference in MAAC defenders and SEC defenders, and he hasn't shot horribly by any means, but we're seeing a lot of 4 for 10, 4 for 12, 6 for 12, 6 for 14, 5 for 15, 2 for 10. So a lot of poor shooting outings, and he just doesn't have the peripheral. So this is one that I think when the sheet comes out, you'll see, Thomason projects well, pretty decent price, but he just doesn't seem to play as well as maybe the projections think. I do like Blue Cane still at 4.9. Played only 18 minutes against South Carolina. South Carolina is just tough, man. Like, I'm really enamored with Lamont Paris right now. I think he's the SEC coach of the year, and especially they're like on their way to the tournament with the way they're playing. So I throw that game out. Before that, Kane had played 20 plus minutes in 3 straight. Played really well against Florida, adequately against Alabama. I do like him for a 4X type of game here at 4.9 if we get him back into the mid-20s range, which I do think he will play. Looking at the rest of the Georgia guards, they're pretty inefficient for the most part. Jabri Abdur-Rahim being one of the better shooters, but Silas Demery not so much. Pretty lackadaisical with his shot. Justin Hill is not a big time scorer, although he is a great facilitator. Blue Cane, there's opportunity there for him, and he is shooting 39% from long range, which he's been improving steadily as the season goes on. He's just somebody that I feel like has got the opportunity here to snatch more minutes and play well. It's kind of a get in early on Blue Cane spot. RJ Melendez leads the team in usage at 24.3%, has a shot rate of 25.5%. Getting into the starting lineup after his monumental 50 bomb against Florida, which I still can't even fathom how he did that. 28 minutes as a starter against Bama, 30 minutes against South Carolina as a starter. I think he'll probably stay in the starting lineup, but he's had some pretty rough outings. Georgia has struggled with him as a starter. The Alabama game, he had 10 rebounds and 3 steals, which propped up his score as he put up 36. But the South Carolina game, he pretty well just only shot 5 times, and they had a good game plan coming in where he wasn't going to be the one to beat them. They did not allow him to get the ball very often, and when he did, he had no open looks. So they did a fantastic job there. I think Mississippi State, again, not a team to be fearful of. They have decent defenders on the perimeter. I could see Melendez playing pretty well here, but 6'6" for him on the road just feels a little bit way too high for me. I don't think I can utilize him there. I do have interest in Silas Demery at 5'8", now that his price has slid below 6K. This is a buy low opportunity. 3 straight games under 15 fantasy points. That'll keep the masses away. And then Jabri Abdur-Rahim at 6K. Coming off a 32 against South Carolina, one of the few players that played well against them. Now his price sits there at just 6K after he was much higher. I like him as a kind of a sneakier option as well. I'm going to have more of this Georgia team and some of my MME stuff. Probably not too much in single entry, though. All right, next game on the slate here, and this is one of my favorites. We're talking about Texas A&M versus Missouri. Total of 142. The Aggies 4.5-point favorites. Wade Taylor is having a fantastic season, priced at 8.7. Some spendy players on the slate that we're going to have to really, make some tough decisions on. Wade Taylor is not above Janai Broome, but he is above Dalton Connect for me. He is above some of the Baylor Shireman's and Quincy Olivare, Boo Buoys of the world. Probably pretty even with Devin Carter. I'll have to make a tough decision there. I'm going to have plenty of both. But as far as a main lineup or a Q lineup, I'm probably leaning more towards Wade Taylor, even over Devin Carter. Love what Wade Taylor is doing. He is just playing so phenomenally in this offense, doing just everything, taking a massive amount of shots. He had 32 shot attempts against Arkansas back in January 16. Like 32 shots. Think about that, how many that is. 14 from long range, 13 free throw attempts, 41 real points. He had a 30 against Ole Miss, real points for 47. Florida was a disappointment. He shot 5 of 18, still had the volume. He also picked up some early foul issues, which cost him a ton of minutes. He had been playing like 35, 36, sometimes even 39. He only played 28 against Florida. He had 25 fantasy points, but that's like losing pretty much 8 minutes of PT with how he puts up fantasy points. That's a huge, huge detriment. So looking at him getting back to a really simplistic matchup against an overmatched Missouri team. It is on the road, which should keep it somewhat close. Wade Taylor is going to take 20 shots, and he's going to do some dirty, dirty things to this Missouri squad. So I hope people overthink this one and fade him, because there are so many other pay-ups that are pretty decent spots, but overall just monster players. And we get Taylor at sub 20% because he's going to just detonate against this Missouri team. I am very confident in Wade Taylor here. Looking at other options for the team and circling back around, like top 16 in usage rate, top 25 in shot rate, has an assist rate of 27%, steal rate top 35 in the country, playing 80% of the available minutes. Like Wade Taylor is just the real deal, and he has more seasons left. He's only a COVID junior, so we get more Wade Taylor. Rumors galore about Tyrese Radford missing a game. That honestly sounded pretty viable, like it was done deal the way people were talking. He ends up starting, playing, and going completely bonkers. Played 38 damn minutes against Florida. 26 points, 5 rebounds, put up a huge 36 fantasy points. So one of those more frustrating things there, because was kind of building around him being out, and then late it happens that he didn't miss. Anderson Garcia at 6'7", he's a really consistent player. If Radford were to miss, Garcia becomes a lock. As far as Henry Coleman, pretty hard to use him right now. 5'5", his minutes have gone south. Without him playing a consistent amount, then Solo Washington, who is trending in the other direction as Coleman trends down, Washington trends up, and he had a really good game against Florida. 28 fantasy points on just 5 shot attempts, 3 blocks, a steal, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, priced at 5'4". Washington was a dynasty league target for me. We have these in-season drafts in one of my leagues, and he was a top priority. I am very, very intrigued by Washington. He doesn't have to score to pan out, and he is directly taking the minutes out of Henry Coleman's bowl. He is a very solid option here as somebody I think is going to give Missouri a lot of problems, especially with these additional minutes coming his way. Yeah, so he's not the cheapest at 5'4" by any means, but if he's going to get 30 minutes, I do not see how we get away from him. Foul rate can be a hazard when it comes to him. It's not as much as it is for other guys, but that is something to be aware of, that Solo can get himself into a little bit of foul trouble. Has a 4.3 fouls per 40 rate. Henry Coleman, by the way, only has a 1.6 fouls per 40 rate, but it always seems like when he's chalky on DFS slates, he finds ways to get himself into foul trouble. I don't know. As far as other options, Jace Carter just played 36 minutes. Not the highest upside there, but he is on the floor a lot, taking those minutes out of Hayden Hefner. For a long time, Hefner was starting, playing big minutes, but not giving the team very much. Jace Carter has taken those minutes away from him. All right, Missouri side, you have Tamar Bates priced all the way up to 7.9. Bates has been incredible. Indiana would love to have him right now. 25.4% shot rate, 44% from long range. He is shooting 95% at the foul line. He's got the second highest mark at the foul line in the country. Top 150 offensive rating. So you have Bates there as probably the lone Missouri guy you could ever feel good about rostering in your main lineup, but it is at a very expensive price there. Sean East is there at 7.2. Like him for GBPs. He hasn't been hitting that high water mark lately that we've seen him hit in the past, but great rates overall, and definitely a guy who's going to play most of the game. And then Noah Carter, man. Noah Carter left for dead by everyone. Like, I was the last one to kind of step away from Noah Carter. I'm a little bit of a fan there. And he comes out and plays 31 minutes against Vanderbilt, 20.6 rebounds, puts up 35. Don't know that I'll be jumping back on there because I'm a little bit concerned there about the minutes. They spiked because he got off to such a hot start. If he struggles, we saw him play 16 against Texas A&M last time. We saw him play 16 against Arkansas. It's a little bit of a worry there for me. I will probably have very, very little exposure to Noah Carter and overall to this team in general. Now, Carolero Martin has been dealing with a foot contusion, what they're calling it. So a bone bruise, basically. Has missed some time, which is a reason why Carter did see some additional minutes there in addition to starting off hot. So we'll have to monitor that situation. And overall, Missouri just hasn't had a lot of healthy bench depth lately. So they're playing those starters a lot of minutes lately. Jordan Butler, who's a cheapie 7-footer who has been starting, hasn't been great, only played 11 minutes. There's a 7'2" kid, Mabor Majak, who played 20 minutes last time out, wasn't great in those minutes. And then we've seen Anthony Robinson, Aiden Shaw, Kurt Lewis, all cheapies, play somewhere between 10 and 15 as well. Not a lot of value on the Missouri side that we can feel good about, unfortunately. All right, Nebraska versus Northwestern. Northwestern 5.5 point favorites, total of 143. Just when you thought Kasai Tamanaga was dead, he blasts off. It was an overtime loss to Illinois, a gritty gritty win for the Illini. Talmadega, 31 points. 31 points, man. 30% usage rate, 33 minutes. I don't know. Do we have to go back to playing him? It's not a great matchup against Northwestern. His price is only 5.7. His logs are ugly and his minutes were dwindling, but yeah, he was really good against Illinois. So I suspect we'll see some ownership there. I would rather play Juwan Gary, regardless of his starting status. He was really good against Illinois. We had a ton of him. He was only 5.3, made total sense there. Played 35 minutes since returning and not starting. He's played 33 minutes and 35, no restrictions whatsoever. Struggled against Wisconsin, but he really had a nice game against Illinois. 12 points, 11 rebounds on his way to 33. Priced at $6K. The Northwestern front court is pretty lowly. They have size, but they are not athletic and they are not that tough. I do think Juwan Gary, as long as he stays out of foul trouble, could be in line for another big game. CJ Wilcher, who had been playing way over his head, finally had a come-to-earth game. Coincided with Talmadega going nuts. 19 minutes for Wilcher after he played 28 against Wisconsin. He's just really tough to play. Over the last couple of years, he's just kind of been a very low upside type of player, but he has been improved this year, I admit. Then you have Rink Mast at 8K. That's a luxury play with all the other top-end pay-ups. Mast at 8K against Northwestern might be a little tough to get to. He did have 26 against them last time they played. He's been everything for them, playing a ton of minutes. 21 shot attempts against Illinois, 18 shot attempts against Wisconsin, 17 against Ohio State. There's merit, but I don't know where and how we would fit him in. And then you have Bryce Williams, 6'4", 34 minutes of just hot garbage against Illinois. Couldn't get it going, 3 for 12. I do like his chances of bouncing back here to a degree. And he is cheap at 6'4", but the matchup's just really not very good. All right, on the Northwestern side, you're paying a premium for Boo Buie at nearly 9K. 3 of his last 4, he's put up 40-plus fantasy points. Now, he wasn't very good against Nebraska. They did lose that game on the road. They held him to 2 of 15 shooting. Now he's going to be looking to bounce back here at home. I can't use Boo Buie at 9K. You know how it is with him. For years, he's tortured us as chalk. He goes off as not chalk. And it's just one of those plays where, he's a probably pretty good look. He's going to take a ton of shots. But where are we inserting him into the lineup at? We simply can't play him over guys like, or I don't think we can, I should say, with my opinion, over Broom, over Carter, over Taylor. Like, that's just Ziegler even. Like, I just don't know how we could play him over any of those guys. And Bowie might put up 40. Don't get me wrong. But it's really tough pre-lock to sit here and say, yeah, Boo Buie's a better play than Janai Broom. I'm just not there. Brooks Barnheiser at 8-1. To me, it always feels like he's too priced up at 8-1. Like, he's put up 51 against Nebraska in their last outing, 24-7. He had 4 steals, 2 blocks, but that seems like lightning in a bottle there. I don't know that will happen again. He's probably going to be close to his normal 30, but he's priced right at that, slightly under at 8-1. I like Ryan Langborg. We hit his prop the other day, over 13.5 points, I believe it was, against Minnesota. He's just playing every single minute of the game. He's technically the third option on the team, but he has really asserted himself the last 4 or 5 games. They brought him in from Princeton to take this role and be a leader and kind of keep the team together when others are playing awful. It's like Ty Berry, who last year, goes through these streaks, and he's even this year goes through streaks where he can't make a shot. They had no other scorers besides Bowie, for most of that. And whenever Berry would not play well, they just wouldn't have the offense to win games. And even look at last year, Chase Oddish, he would always, have these big games, but then he would follow it up with these 2 or 3 games where he just couldn't hit a bucket. Having Langborg there gives you that luxury to, pick up the slack when others can't score. Shooting 41% from long range, has a true shooting percentage, well over 56%, playing 83% of the available minutes, just very comfortable and playing the same role that he played last year on that Princeton team that, won a game in the tournament. And he was a big part of that when they make the Sweet 16 against Creighton before bowing out. Langborg was just awesome through that entire run. As far as the front court players go, like, Nicholson, he could play 30 minutes, which is unlikely, but even if he does, he's not putting up a big number. We were using Luke Hunger for value for quite a while, but there's no upside there. And Nick Martinelli had some nice games earlier in the season, but he's just really not that high upside. I hate the matchup for him against Nebraska. So we need to find some value. We're going to have to play some guys that maybe we're not as comfortable with, but that's how this slate is shaping up to be. All right, Notre Dame versus Duke. We have a total of 134. Duke 16.5-point favorites. This could be a weird one because I think a lot of people stay away from Duke looking at it, worrying about the blowout. Maybe we see low 30s minutes for those starters instead of the mid to upper 30s as we would normally see for these guys. Kyle Filipkowski at 8-9 is in play, but I don't think there's enough upside there. The opportunity cost is high. He's another pay up that's behind Broom for me. Do like Tyrese Proctor. He's only 6'4", playing a ton of minutes. So that is, to me, I always consider values under 6K. He's kind of a semi-value there at 6'4" in that mid-range area. Mark Mitchell, same thing at 6'8". I think he's a nice look there. And then you have Jeremy Roach sitting there at 5'9". Regardless of his starting status, creeping up on 30 minutes, that's a nice look for him. If we think it turns into a blowout, maybe we've got Caleb Foster playing some additional minutes there at 4'8", Ryan Young playing more at 4'1". There's a couple of different looks that you can consider there on the Duke side. Notre Dame, like Marcus Burton, I don't know. I think he's a really solid look here against this Duke team. Nobody rosters him anymore. High usage rate, high shot rate, takes a ton of shots, contributes in other categories as well. He's a pretty solid look. Had about 30 against Duke last time they played in a 67-59 loss. The price is reasonable at 7.6, but it's just one of those looks where, where do we get him in? Who do we play him over? There's just a lot of other guys in that range or slightly above that are just so much better overall for the type of lineup that I want to build. J.R. Coe, he's only 5'4", playing big minutes, but a very low upside for him as well. He's failed to register even 12 fantasy points in each of the last two. He struggled mightily against Duke last time out as well. You do have some cheapies. Notre Dame's been messing with let's pull this up, their starting lineup too. They've been playing some different guys in the front court here from time to time. The starting group that they ran against Pittsburgh was the usual Kevin and Jai, Marcus Burton, JR, and then they had Tay Davis in there, but Logan Imes instead of Kerry Booth, who only played 7 minutes. That's a concern. And then Julian Roper, who played a couple of games as a starter earlier in the month, back to the bench here the last couple of games, played 21 minutes. Logan Imes as a starter wasn't bad, played 29 minutes, 4.6 rebounds, an assist, and a steal. Perhaps we can look his way. He's only 3'9". He's played 30 minutes in back-to-back games, 30 against Virginia as well. Did make value in both of those games at his price. Now he's up to about 394K. Turns into a blowout. He'll volume his way at 30 minutes there, do enough in those rebounding and assist categories to pay off. I do like Logan Imes here, especially if we think those minutes continue. So a lot will have to do with him still starting, but it looks to be a situation where we can use him. Kerry Booth's minutes are trending the wrong direction, so can't really use him. That's a shame. Julian Roper is technically in play at 4-5, but he's been awful. And then you have Tay Davis, who returned to the starting lineup, played 32 minutes, was good against Pitt. Can't rely on his minutes, but he did play 27 against Duke last time. He was a factor, had 21 fantasy points, so I do like Tay there if he is a starter once again as well. All right, last game on the slate, UCLA versus Stanford. Kind of wedged this one on here. It's a total of 136, just a tick under, actually 135.5 now. 2.5-point favorite is Stanford. Now, UCLA, lacking the talent needed in this program. Mick Cronin is probably not long for this world. They didn't do enough in the recruiting or the portal. They have won 3 in a row, so say what you will about them. A 65-50 win over a USC team that's quickly falling to the NIT. 71-63 win over Oregon State, and then a surprising 71-63 win over Oregon as well. I do think they have a chance to beat Stanford here, but Stanford clearly has more talent than they do. Looking at the last game, Dylan Andrews, Lazar Stefanovic, both played 32 minutes. Both played very well. 15-10 for Lazar, 21-4-7 for Dylan Andrews. Brandon Williams, who is relatively cheap, played 25 minutes. Didn't do a lot in the statistical categories that you want. He's on the floor, but a lot of fit-bitting, as they say. Adim Bana had foul trouble galore. Wasn't great. And the UCLA bench, a lot of lackluster and lowly performances from guys like Adi Mara, Kenneth Nwaba, and Will McClendon, which has been the case for most of not only this season for guys like Nwaba and McClendon, but for most of their careers as well. Sebastian Mack is really interesting at 5'8". Most of the first 2 months of the season, Mack was the dude on this team, the clear alpha youngster. But I think he's kind of, fallen down the pecking order a little bit here, especially with some of his boneheaded moves that he's made. Had some turnover issues there early in conference play, was just absolutely terrible. Then he had suffered a few injuries here, minor ailments. I do like the fact that he played 25 minutes against Oregon. I think he's going to start trending in the right direction here in terms of playing time, getting close to 30. Still remains a starter, so that's a good thing. But obviously, Mick Cronin has a very short leash on him right now, so mistakes are going to have to be avoided, and that's tough for a younger kid because he's constantly going to be looking over his shoulder when he does make them. But I like the spot for him against Stanford, and the price of 5'8" certainly is advantageous. We just need those minutes to start creeping up closer to 30 and beyond. Dylan Andrews at 6'8". That might be a little tough, but Jesus, 3 straight games over 29 fantasy points coinciding with their winning streak. You can imagine he'll continue to play heavy minutes. He has been over 36 minutes in each of the last 5 games. Like I said, that will continue with how well he's playing. He was completely shut down against Arizona, but got into Mike's secret stuff ever since and playing extremely well. I never would have thought $7K for Dylan Andrews would be a price I'd actually consider, but here we are looking at what he's doing and how well he's playing, and we certainly have to look at him as a possible late hammer type of play. Adim Bana at 7.2. I feel like he's going to be chalk. Like, Bana always projects decently well, but there's just a conglomerate of folks out there in the industry that roster him every slate, and when you get him at a lower price like this, you're going to see a spike in ownership. I'm not the biggest Bana guy. I feel like foul trouble on the road seems like an inevitability for him. He's kind of, I guess he was good against USC. Outside of the foul game against Oregon, he's been fairly consistent, but he has been fouling out of most games or picking up 4 fouls in most. Against Arizona and ASU, he fouled out in both of those games in under 30 minutes. So there is a lot of risk there for Bana because of his foul issues. But when he is in a rhythm, staying out of foul trouble and being featured on offense, he is a real tough player to fade. So I recognize that. But if he's going to be chalk, I'm okay going up against the field there and being underweight. And then you have Lazar Stefanovic at 7K. 4 out of his last 5, he's hit the 29 to 30 fantasy point mark. Again, they just don't have the talent or the bench. They have to play Stefanovic and Andrews every minute. Those guys are going to continue to do so. And I think Mack will join them here eventually sooner rather than later. At 3.6, Brandon Williams is a starter. He's played 20-plus minutes in 3 straight games. He's only reached double-digit fantasy points once in those 3. Value kind of lean, but there's a guy that can allow you to do some things up top. And as I always like to harp at you guys, we're not as worried about Williams scoring 4 or 5x as we are the guys he allows us to pay for. We need them to get 6, 7, 8x. So that's how we're treating Brandon Williams. On the Stanford side, Cannon Carlisle missed that last game due to an upper body injury that he suffered. I believe it was against ASU. He's kind of been struggling the last couple of games here. You would think that the return of Jared Bynum was the reason, but not really, because Bynum hasn't been playing all that many minutes. He's been under 10 in each of the last 2 games and still clearly playing through his lower body injuries. So you've got the upper body and the lower body injuries competing there. The big play I want to look at here if Carlisle is out is Benny Geeler. We were able to swap to him in that last slate Stanford was on. And, that's one of those spots where you just don't worry about matchup. Arizona plays a style where even though they're good defensively, there will be plenty of possessions there. Geeler took 10 shots. He only made one of them, but because of his 9 assists and his 3 boards, he put up 22.75 fantasy points at 3.8. And a lot of people missed the boat there, didn't roster him. If you did, you probably had a fairly good slate. I believe that was one of those later slates as well. So he's only 4-1. He is going to be a premier value play if Carlisle is out again. It is one of the later games. There are, 5 games starting at that 6 p.m. hour, 9 p.m. for those of you on the East Coast. So it's not as if we have a true late game hammer here where it's starting 2 hours after everyone else. So we'll have some moves here. I think you start your main lineup off with the idea that you're going to play Benny Geeler. If it comes out that Carlisle is going to play, then you can back off him, and then you can utilize some of these other games to, make 2-3 swaps, something like that. It won't be a 1-for-1. You'll have to, allow yourself to have a 2-man swap probably to make it happen. And there is enough plays in the Mississippi State game and Texas A&M game and even that Duke spot to where you'll have some PMR left to make that happen. Bynum is really cheap at 4.32, but clearly not himself yet. And Andrej Stojakovic, he's cheap at 4K, but his minutes are not there. He is a little bit, I think the speed of the D1 game is a little bit much for him. Probably not going to be much of a fantasy relevant play for the rest of the season. You do have Spencer Jones, who is the Arizona killer at 6'2", 25 against Arizona. Didn't really live up to the moniker there, but he is cheap. He is playing a ton of minutes. Without Carlisle, I think Jones is a very strong play once again, so we'll see how that happens. Michael Jones at 6K, his minutes have been going in the right direction. 32 against Arizona. Don't mind him. And then you have Brandon Angel at 6'3", has really carved out a meaningful role on the team this year, taking a sometimes an alpha role in certain games, but at the very least a veteran leader on this team. A little bit high at 6'3", not somebody I'll find myself rostering all that much, but he does project pretty well, and he tends to do so. And then you have another expensive play in Maxime Reynaud at 8'7", coming off of 50 against Arizona, 37 against ASU, 32 against Cal, 25 against Washington. We held him to the least amount in his last 4 games. Again, I don't mind him as a play, but I just don't know how he would get there. He did struggle against UCLA, 2 for 10 in their first matchup, 8 points, 9 rebounds. That would be a disaster at 8'7". So he is definitely lower on my priority list, but I think he will see some rostership because of how he's playing. And the Stanford team has been dealing with various injuries and having to play him more minutes. 36 minutes against Arizona. That's huge. He typically plays about 27 to 28. Give him 36 minutes against anyone, and he's going to have a hell of a chance to pay off there. So a lot will have to do with Carlisle's status because it does affect so many different players on this team, not only from a usage standpoint, but obviously from a minute standpoint, regardless if they play his position or not, because Coach Haas is going to play a slightly bigger lineup there with Reynaud playing 36 minutes if they don't have Carlisle. All right, the core, and I am going to share my screen here. I wanted to wait till the end. The core that I'm looking at here, Janai Broome, I don't know how we don't play him. He's just so good against this Bama team, or he was earlier when we were high on him. I know it's a high price. I don't like to core guys that are so high price, 9.3. It's kind of restrictive. All right. I knew something was going to happen there. Sorry about that, guys. My laptop took an absolute dump just now, right when I tried to share my screen. So I apologize for that. Anyways, we're going into core. Janai Broom, core play number 1. Absolutely love him. I'm actually impressed with myself. I got back on within like 2 minutes there. That's pretty good stuff there. Core play number 2. It's a little trickier, but I am going to give us a little bit of value here because we have to plug in Benny Gieler with the idea of being able to finagle the rest of our lineup, and we will make changes if Carlisle goes. So plan on him being core play number 2 out of a necessity for needing value. And then core play number 3. I can't core Tolu Smith because it's a running joke in our Discord, especially with Adam Young, but I'm very high on Tolu. I mean, how can you not be? Just such a great overall spot for him in this matchup. But the third core is going to be a little more open-ended. I was a lot more definitive on today's slate and last night's show. And it's going to be really tough because I know he's priced up high, but I'm going to go with Wade Taylor. And we're just going to find a way to make it work. Wade Taylor and Janai Broom together with Gieler. We're going to make it happen, and then we're gonna basically surf the rest of our lineup for 5 to 6K guys and just make it work. I think those two are going to carry us in a way that makes it absolutely necessary to roster both. All right, let's get into PrizePicks here. Scared to do my screen now because I don't want to have it drop so late into the show. But all right. Let's get off of Patty Mahomes. I don't want to talk about that. All right, PrizePicks. Here's the updated board, and there are some pretty solid looks here. They're not giving a Jalen Cook prop. They're scared. They don't want to do that. So I like Mike James versus Syracuse. Kind of feel like he's a bit of a sneakier play. I mentioned that during the Louisville game. 13.5 points. Like the over 13.5 there for Mike James. That's just a really solid look. I think he definitely has a nice offensive game here, similar to what we had from Jordan Dingle today. Still sick, losing my voice. There's also, let's see here. So there's a big game mid-major wise between Drake and SIU. And if you haven't had a chance really to pay attention to either team, you really should try to watch this one. The Missouri Valley time in and each and every year has a team or two that are just really lethal and capable of winning multiple games in the tournament. A 10 right for Drake. Tucker DeVries is the stud that everyone knows on Drake if you follow it all, but a 10 right over 12.5 points versus SIU. That's a very high confident play for me in this matchup against SIU, which is going to be very fun. The star on the SIU side is Xavier Johnson. Common name. I know there's about 4 of them around the collegiate landscape, but he is an absolute star at the mid-major level. Let's see. Tyrese Proctor over 11 versus Notre Dame. We've been hitting his point prop. That's high on my priority list. He's been really good. Especially with Roach back, he's played even better, if you can believe that. So over 11 points for Tyrese Proctor, also going to be a main option for us and high on the priority list. Let's take a look at PRA real quick. No fantasy points until tomorrow, which is pretty typical. No. Oh, there it is. Cameron Matthews. I like Cameron Matthews bounce back here. I thought it might be low. 19.5 PRA against Georgia. Just going to be a game in which he probably pulls down 10 plus rebounds, needs to score 6-7 points, get a couple assists, and he'll be at that 20 plus PRA. So over 19.5 points, rebounds, and assists for Cam Matthews. All right. I think that'll do it. I don't even have my damn, that really screwed me on the computer crashing. I apologize for that. I will be more prepared on Friday to share my my projection sheet there. Those of you who have come over to the FTN daily site after the last couple of months rocking with the show to see what we're all about. I appreciate you. Still running the one price for all. Really good deals. FTNdaily.com. The pricing page will show you everything. It's access to each and every sport. You get optimizers, projections, our daily articles, shows behind the paywall for Discord, all kinds of goodies, lots of things happening. We have the best team in the industry by far. I'm very confident in that. I appreciate you guys continuing to support not only me, but the FTN network itself. Let's keep on grinding here. Get those green screens going. We'll be back on Friday after a couple of days off. We'll have a well-prepared, no crash show on Friday. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. See you then, and take care.